Salut tout le monde, hello everyone, and welcome to this French GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. In this particular video tutorial, we're going to look at the different French GCSE and iGCSE listening question types. I'm going to take you through all of the most common question types that can come up in the listening exam one by one and reveal the best techniques, the best ways to answer them. So it should be very valuable for students of all exam boards. First of all, just to introduce myself, my name is Dhananjay Talwar. I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge, graduating back in 2015. And I've been an educator since that time, usually or mostly as a tutor. So I've learned more than 20 languages myself, to different levels, of course, but at least 9 of those to fluency. Something that I'm hugely passionate about, naturally, and that I love to do. And I love motivating my students, enthusing them, making sure they understand the benefits of learning languages, giving them techniques to allow them to do so too, and helping them to get to their goals, such as target grades. I've helped over 500 students to achieve or exceed their target grade in French GCSE or iGCSE as a full-time tutor. That's mainly over the last 6 years as a full-time tutor. I have tutored other languages as well, 8 of them to GCSE and iGCSE level, and some at higher levels too. So this is a look at the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. So as of July 2025, at least, there are 4 different exam boards for GCSE French and 2 for iGCSE French. So you should recognize your exam board here. It is beneficial to be aware of your exam board as early as possible, as there can be differences between different exam boards. Although for the listening exam, the question types actually do tend to be more standardized. Okay. Speaking of question types, this is a list of the French GCSE and iGCSE listening exam question types. So this definitely doesn't mean that all of these question types will come up for you necessarily in your paper. However, this is more a list of the most common question types that can come up. And the frequency and so on does depend a little depending on the exam board as well. So these are the questions that I will take you through one by one in more detail and explain how exactly to go about answering them. They include gap fill questions, matching up questions, multiple choice questions, questions where you have to identify the correct statements, questions where you have to answer in English, questions where you have to answer in French. And at the bottom here, I've got this in brackets, the dictation task, which is new. That's only for certain exam boards for the exams as of, starting from 2026 onwards. And the dictation task is in brackets because that's not actually addressed in this video. There's a different video that I've done on the new dictation task and how to answer that. So I highly recommend watching that other video if relevant for you as well. In this particular video, we're going to look at all of the question types mentioned above and go through those individually. Okay, so we'll start off with gap fill questions. Gap fill questions are a fairly common question type. For each question type that I go through, I will give you an example, show you an example taken from a past paper, explain the techniques required and what to be careful of doing for that particular question type. So this particular example comes from a 2022 paper for Pearson edXL GCSE. And as you can see, this particular question is based on the theme of mes passe-temps, hobbies, my hobbies. Every question is generally linked to a particular topic area. So I'll read out the instructions. Here it says, Eric is talking about his hobbies. Complete the sentences by choosing a word or words from the box. There are some words that you will not use. So gap fill questions will very much be set out like this, usually. Of course, the first thing to do for absolutely any question type is read over the instructions carefully and make sure you understand exactly what there is to be done. For gap fill questions, you'll then be presented with a series of words, normally in a box like this. Those are the possible options you've got to choose from. And then you'll have a series of sentences or statements. These are the statements from A to E below. Each of those will have a gap in it. And of course, that's why they're called gap fill questions. You simply have to choose which of the words in the box should go in each gap. So I have a very specific technique for these kinds of gap fill questions, which I know many students do not learn in school or elsewhere, and which should be very useful. And that is using the grammar to help you as much as possible. Many students will simply listen to the audio and try and decide based on what they've heard on the audio which of the answers makes the most sense based on the meanings of these words in the box. But I would try and use grammatical categories to help you first. I'll give you an example. If we look at 1b here, it says, comme sport, il fait du. So as a sport, he does something. Obviously, we have to complete that sentence. The first thing I would do is look at what the options are. So, we know that the word in the gap comes after du. In French, du is only used for masculine singular nouns. And that means that the answer that goes in the gap for 1b must be a masculine singular noun. So that already narrows down the options considerably. But in fact, we can go even further than that because for this particular example, because it says sport. So we know that the answer for the sentence to make sense has to be a sport, really. So that narrows down the options even further to actually just two options, karate, and judo. So you can see that using the grammar, we've eliminated the vast majority of the options and narrowed it down to just two. And then, of course, you have to listen to the audio to find which of those two is the correct answer. But I would always start with the grammar for these kinds of gap fill questions. Then, of course, you listen out carefully to the audio to decide which of those options is correct. You do get a variety of gap fill questions, though, so you may not be able to use this grammar technique for all of them, or you may not be able to narrow down the options to just two possible options based on the grammar first. There may be still more possibilities at that point. Likewise, watch out for trick questions. That is very important. And pay attention to details. Trick questions are very common for listening, even for reading, where they seem to indicate that one answer is correct only to contradict that later on, or indicate that in fact another answer makes more sense. Watch out for that. And you do have to pay attention to the details in the audio too, to not fall foul of these tricks. Okay, our next question type is matching up questions. This example comes from a Pearson Edexcel GCSE paper, but from 2023. So this question is all about sport. The instructions, it says, Emmeline is talking about her friends. Who is she talking about? Choose between Farid, Roseline, Loïc, and Gwenaël. Each one of these first names can be used several times. Okay, so matching up questions are usually when you're given a series of options, normally names, and then a series of statements, which are from A to E over here. And you have to match up which name corresponds with which sentence or statement. So for these, you certainly have to use the audio to help you. Unfortunately, you can't use grammar to narrow down the options either. So listen out carefully to the audio and make sure that you don't fall prey to any of these trick questions. If we look at 2b here, for example, they're asking who doesn't like sport for 2b. It would be quite common, for instance, in the audio to hear something like Farid doesn't do sports very often. And at that point, many students would be tempted to write Farid down immediately as the answer, the correct answer for 2b. But the audio will often give further information later on that may contradict that. For example, it may say something like, Gwenaël absolutely hates sport, which indicates much more clearly that Gwenaël should actually be the correct answer for 2b and not Farid. So watch out for those kinds of trick questions. And as it says here, do not write down the first name that you hear for every statement. Okay, moving on now to multiple choice questions. This example comes from an AQA paper of 2023. Multiple choice questions are actually very common for listening and reading. You can see the instructions for this one they're in English. And this one is all about marriage. For these particular multiple choice questions, you'll be given different options to choose from. And you'll normally have to choose one of those options as the correct one. The number of options can certainly vary. You can see that here there are 3 of them per question. That's often the case, but it can vary. It can be more than that, even potentially less than that as well. So make sure that you do read through the instructions carefully to make sure you understand what it is that you've got to do. For these kinds of questions, or any question type where you're presented with a few different options, actually, what can be very useful is the elimination technique. So many students use this to good effect. Elimination is effectively eliminating or ruling out answers that are not correct, that you know that are not correct. So even if you're not sure what the correct answer is, you can rule out or mentally eliminate answers that you know are wrong. For example, if we look at 7.1, which says, according to recent statistics, the total number of weddings in Belgium has either A, gone down, B, gone up, or C, stayed the same. Obviously, we have to choose one of those correct 3 answers as the correct one. And even if you're not sure what the right answer is exactly, if you're sure that, for example, A is definitely not correct based on what you've heard from the audio, then you could mentally eliminate or even put a small mark to show to yourself that you've eliminated that answer on the paper and rule that out, that option, which increases your chances of getting the right answer, because then even if you guess, even if you're taking a random guess, you have fewer options to choose from. So that can be a very useful technique. Read the question and answer options carefully. And as I said before, watch out for trick questions, because that is pretty common, where they will try and mislead the students by mentioning, for example, every single one of the options in some way. I would, for multiple choice questions in particular, try and, of course, read through the instructions first of all. But then I would try to read through each and every question and every single option for each question, ideally before the audio has even started, because that then means that you're more prepared and that you've got some idea of what to listen out for once the audio actually starts. So that can be really helpful. I could give a good example of a potential trick question. For example, for 7.1, you may well hear something in the audio about how the total number of weddings in Belgium from 2015 to 2020, say, stayed the same. And many students would be very tempted to write C as the answer for 7.1 at that point, only for the audio to then go on to say something like, however, more recently, between 2020 and 2025, the total number of weddings in Belgium has gone up. And that extra bit of information would reveal that the answer should be B rather than C. So try and make sure that you don't just write down the first thing that you hear. Okay, our next question type is where you have to identify the correct statements. This example comes from a 2023 paper for Cambridge iGCSE. Yeah, you can see that for questions that ask you to identify the correct statements, you'd of course be given a list of statements, which are from A to E here for each question. The number of statements, again, can really vary. It can be 5, it can certainly be more than that as well. Yeah, that can vary. So make sure you pay attention to how it is for your specific question. And then you'll be asked to select a certain number of statements that are correct, based, of course, on the information given in the audio. So here, for instance, you have to select 2 correct statements. But again, the number of correct statements you have to select can vary. So it may not be 2, it may be more, or even potentially less than that. I can read out the instructions here quickly, which say that you'll hear an interview with Julien, who's talking about his accommodation in France. You will hear the interview twice. There are 2 pauses in the interview. For every question, tick the 2 correct boxes from A to E. You first have a few seconds to read through the questions. So certainly for questions where you've got to identify the correct statements, I would read through all of the options first. Try and do that initially so that you've got a good idea of what your options are to choose from and what you're listening out for when the audio starts as well. So make sure that you've read over the options, and if they're in French, have a good idea of what they mean in English too. It also states in the interview that you will hear the interview twice. In the instructions, it says that you'll hear the interview twice. That is also very important. Of course, you'll hear everything, every question in the listening exam twice, exactly twice. So generally, that is important to be aware of and to use that as efficiently as possible. You can again use elimination for these kinds of questions. Wherever you're presented with a certain number of options to choose from, elimination can be a very useful technique. So if you're not sure what the correct statements are exactly, but you want to rule out certain correct statements, you can certainly do that to increase your chances of getting the marks. And again, watch out for trick questions. Make sure you pay attention to the details as well. Okay, the next question type is where you've got to answer in English. This example comes from a 2023 paper from AQA, and you can see that this is all about charity. So these kinds of questions will require you as a student to actually write out the answer rather than just say ticking a box. You normally would not have to write out a substantial answer at all. Usually just a few words or even a one-word answer is enough. Perhaps a short phrase at times. But if you find yourself writing out long sentences or even more than one sentence, either when you're asked to write in English or whether you're asked to answer in French as well, then often you're providing, or usually you'd be providing too much information. It is important to read through the question, as always, to make sure you understand what it's asking for and what's required. And I would also check the number of marks, because the number of marks for every question can be a very useful guide as to how much information you have to give or how many details. If one of these questions is worth 2 marks, that normally means you have to give 2 details, for example, or 2 different pieces of information. Try to identify the correct part of the audio, so where exactly the answer is in the audio. That's usually the trick for these questions where you've got to answer in English or in French. That's really what it comes down to, finding where in the audio the actual answer lies. And once you've done that, the audio, of course, would be in French. So for these questions, answering in English, you'd have to translate that. You simply have to translate the correct part of the audio where you've identified the answer is. You translate the relevant part into English. Those are the steps essentially for these questions. I would also only give as much detail or information as is required. If it's a 1-mark question, for example, I would not give more than one piece of information. Sometimes students try and do that to hedge their bets because they may feel that it's a good idea to give more pieces of information because if you give 2 pieces of information instead of 1, you increase the chances of getting the mark because at least one of those pieces of information should be correct. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. If you've made a mistake while giving that extra piece of information or noted something incorrect, then you risk losing the mark entirely. So I would only give the number of pieces of information that is required by the question. Okay, and our last type of question is questions where you've got to answer in French. So this example, again, is from an AQA paper, this time from 2022. The question itself asks, answer the question in French, of course, and then what do we see on the classroom walls? Mention 2 things. You can see, of course, that the question's worth 2 marks this time, which is also very useful because that in itself indicates that you normally have to provide 2 different bits of information. So very useful to note that too. Again, when you've got to answer in French, like you did for the answering in English questions, identifying where the correct answer actually comes in the audio is often the key. And then the audio itself is in French too, naturally. So you simply have to write down or transcribe that correct part of the audio where the answer itself actually is. You can use the audio, try and use the audio to help you as much as you can. That's very much the trick. Once you've identified where the answer is in the audio, you may just have to transcribe that. You may not have to change anything at all. Sometimes you'll be required to change certain details, perhaps the pronouns or the verb form, so that it makes good sense for your answer. But often you can simply transcribe the answer as you hear it in the audio. And the answer should be just a word or a few words, really, for these kinds of questions. You shouldn't be writing much more information than that. Okay, so just a quick quiz now to test your knowledge and understanding of the French GCSE and iGCSE listening question types. So, question one: what is the technique of elimination? Um, so, elimination means eliminating answers which are definitely incorrect. If you're given different options to choose from, this can be very useful to get you closer to the correct answer. Yeah, elimination can be a really useful technique. Essentially, yeah, even if you're not sure of what the correct answer is, you can increase the chances of getting to the correct answer by eliminating wrong answers. Question two is true or false. So you'll hear everything or each question in the listening exam exactly twice. I'll give you a bit of time actually to think over this before showing the answer. Okay, so let me show you the answer now. This is true, of course. Try and make the most of this as much as you can. You should hear everything in the listening exam twice. There are various strategies for making the most of that. Sometimes students, for example, note down on their exam paper an idea of what they've heard the first time and then confirm it or only write the final answers after listening to the audio twice. Sometimes they will write down all of the answers that they think they know the first time, and then only focus on those questions that they're unsure of the second time they hear the audio. There's various techniques, which I do go through in another video as well, but try and make the most of getting to hear everything exactly twice and knowing that in advance too. Okay, question three is true or false again. So you should always answer the questions in the listening exam in French. So I'll give a bit of time to think over this. Okay, I will show you the answer now. This is false. This one's false. So if the question requires the student to write out an answer, because definitely not every question will, a lot of them in both listening and reading papers will simply ask you to tick a box or indicate, say, a person's name or so on, put in one-word answers. But if you have to write out an answer, you should answer in the same language that the question is written in. You can always follow this general rule. The instructions, however, in the exam paper should indicate very clearly actually which language to answer in. So you shouldn't have to worry about that too much at all. Okay, question four. How can you use grammar to help you when answering gap fill questions? So gap fill questions were the first type of question I went through actually. Can you remember how grammar can help you to get to the right answer there? Again, I'll let you think about it a bit before showing the correct answer. Okay, let me give the correct answer now then. So grammar can often help to eliminate options that would not grammatically fit in that gap. This can considerably narrow down the options to help to choose the correct answer, but crucially, it does depend on the question. So sometimes you may not be able to use grammar to help you, really. It depends on the options that you're given as well. Sometimes you may be able to use grammar to help you, but you'll still have 4 or 5 different options, for example, to choose from. So you still have to listen out very carefully to the audio. Okay, for any questions about any of this or for information about more personalized help that I offer, you can contact me by email, through Facebook, or Instagram. I post on social media, specifically Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, each and every day about GCSE and iGCSE exams for French and other languages. I offer a lot of advice there on how to maximize your marks for GCSE exams, how to create revision plans, and so on, as well as talking about my love of languages naturally, more generally, how to learn languages, how to make the process fun and efficient. I do have many resources available too, including free resources for French, GCSE, and iGCSE, and other languages. And I have a Facebook group that's free to join as well for French, GCSE, and iGCSE students and their parents too. I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and more as well. So if you'd like to know more about any of that, don't hesitate to get in touch.